The Westland Whirlwind was a British low-wing twin-engine fighter developed by Westland Aircraft. Introduced on the 11th of October 1938, the Whirlwind was one of the fastest combat aircraft in the world at the time, and, with 4 20mm cannons in the nose, was the first cannon-armed fighter for the Royal Air Force. Indeed, the innovative Whirlwind sported many advanced features of its day. With just 114 Whirlwinds built, it was used exclusively by just 2 squadrons of the RAF in World War II up until 1943. Known as the fighter that missed the Battle of Britain, it hit its stride later in the war as a fighter bomber and ground attack platform. The Whirlwind point of origin began in 1935, when the British Air Ministry released specification F-3735 asking for a long-range single-seat fighter armed with 4 cannons. 6 projects, including 3 twin-engine, were submitted to meet this specification. The Boulton-Paul P-88, the Bristol Type 153A, a Hawker Hurricane variant, the Supermarine 312, the Supermarine 313, and the Westland P9. While the Supermarine 313 was the favoured craft, the Westland project won the bid due to Supermarine admitting to an unacceptable delay in speed to production. Thus, an order for 2 Westland prototypes was placed in February 1937. The man in charge of a radical departure from the Westland's typical high-wing fabric-covered airframe was Edward Teddy Petter. Teddy's rise in Westland was remarkable, becoming technical director at the age of just 26. Of course, it didn't hurt that the appointment was made by managing director Sir Ernest Willoughby Petter, Teddy's father. It also didn't hurt that Arthur Davenport, Westland's chief designer, was on the project, and there is a claim that John Carver Meadows Frost had designed the fuselage of the new Westland. To obtain the desired performance of 330 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, the Westland team chose to minimize drag. The 2 Rolls-Royce Peregrine engines were fitted in closely streamlined nacelles, and in a novel move their radiators were fitted inside the wing inboard sections, something that would be later copied in the de Havilland Mosquito and the Hawker Tempest. Unfortunately, the selection of the Peregrine engine would be a critical error for the Whirlwind. More on that later. Despite this, it must be stated, Petter and Davenport brought some remarkable design innovations in the Whirlwind build. Truly groundbreaking was the rear fuselage, not so much in its use of an exotic magnesium alloy instead of the more usual aluminium, but in the fact that it was a pure monocoque. Belt and braces had been the way until then. While the principle of an aircraft's skin contributing to its strength was well established, few designers had sufficient faith in the theory to let a tube of thin metal hold it all together without a lot of internal frames, stringers, and bracing. Likewise, years before becoming commonplace, they used a tail acorn to smooth out the pressure gradients that would make shocks around the Whirlwind's T-tail. At the time, the flutter that made the Whirlwind vibrate in a dive was understood to be the result of interference drag, but whatever was causing it, the solution was an acorn and a fairing. The shape on the prototype's leading edge grew from a pimple to a bulbous acorn, each iteration proving more effective than the last. They used Fowler flaps, still very new in the 1930s. A flap that didn't just hinge, it slid backwards and down. Revolutionary at the time, the device gave more chord and more lift, but this was a two-edged sword, as it introduced an extraordinarily complex geometry to the system of rollers, actuators, jacks and guides. And the engineering challenge was compounded by linkage of this system to the cooling gills on the trailing edge. Their use, or maybe frosts, of slab sides on the fuselage, leaving the pressure gradients of the wing to deal with interference drag, was profound application of aerodynamic theory. It was in 1937 that the Moldrite Company began to produce a complete rounded canopy in its new perspex material, and it was perhaps with some industry inside knowledge that Petter incorporated it in the Whirlwind's designs. The bubble canopy, teardrop-shaped and fully transparent, afforded Whirlwind pilots remarkable cabin vision. They removed the leading edge of the wing, placing a duct containing radiators and oil coolers, a method later borrowed by the North American aviation team to produce the P-51's drag-reducing belly scoop. There is some contention that flow breakdown inside the duct meant that very often not all the air that should have got to the radiators did, causing overheating. But the Meredith effect and a lack of external protuberances for cooling did make the Whirlwind more aerodynamic than most. They placed slats on the leading edge of each outer wing. These spring-loaded slats were meant to pop out at low speed and delay a stall. It was a piece of advanced aerodynamics that was generally sound, but the automated deployment presented problems, with many later wired in place as they inappropriately activated. The cluster of 4 20mm Hispano autocannon were aimed by simply looking down the nose. Thus, the concentrated fire needed no harmonization. They all pointed the same way and delivered rounds within inches of each other, effectively making the Whirlwind a piece of flying artillery. But as they were using drum magazines of just 60 rounds each, firing time was quite limited. Perhaps obsessing on drag too much, a fully retracting tailwheel with doors was implemented, not something you would normally find on a fighter in the 30s. The mechanism was overly complicated. High landing speeds and grass fighter strips meant complete failures of the unit were not uncommon, and initially the engine exhaust was routed through the fuel tanks in the wings to reduce parasitic drag. The Air Ministry, however, thought that this was dangerous and insisted that conventional exhaust stacks be fitted. The prototype, L6844, first flew on the 11th of October 1938, and it went very well. The Whirlwind exhibited excellent handling characteristics and proved to be very easy to fly at all speeds. But it should be noted, in a testament to the complexity of the design, delays caused by over 250 modifications to the two prototypes led to an initial production order for 200 aircraft being held up until January 1939, followed by a second order for 200 more for fighter squadrons being scheduled to begin in September 1940. Alas, the production orders would be cancelled after just 114 units, for reasons to become clear. The production Whirlwind was 32 feet 3 inches long, stood at 11 feet, had a wingspan of 45 feet, and a wing area of 250 square feet. Powered by two Rolls-Royce Peregrine V12 liquid-cooled piston engines, providing 885 horsepower each. It had a maximum speed of 360 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, a range of just 800 miles, and a supposed service ceiling of 30,300 feet, reaching 15,000 feet in 5 minutes and 54 seconds. For armament, it sported 4 Hispano 20mm cannons with 60 rounds per gun, and the Whirly Bomber variant could carry 2 250-pound or 2 500-pound bombs. But immediately upon delivery in May 1940, things took a very serious and dark downward turn for the Westland Whirlwind. Pilots of the 25th Squadron began to question why the altitude performance wasn't what it was during test flights. Indeed, they complained that the performance of the Whirlwind above 20,000 feet fell off rapidly, and reported that above 25,000 feet its fighting ability to be extremely poor, and that the maximum height it could actually attain was just 27,000 feet, and that on every occasion that a height test was carried out, there had been a minor defect, either in air screw revolutions or in lack of boost pressure. Petter blamed a fall-off in boost pressures delivered by the superchargers with height at twice the rate anticipated, in effect placing the blame with the Rolls-Royce Engines division. Rolls-Royce, in turn, was uninterested in troubleshooting or further developing its Peregrine engines. Indeed, in August 1940, Ernest Hives, head of the Rolls-Royce Aero Engine Division, wrote to Air Chief Marshal Wilfred Freeman expressing his wish to stop work on the Peregrine, Vulture and other engine development projects to concentrate efforts on the Merlin and Griffon. While this request was rebuked, the Peregrine was nevertheless eventually cancelled, with only 301 engines being built. Unhelpfully, the technical director of the test facility that had given the aircraft a clean bill of health and a certified ceiling of 31,000 feet claimed the aircraft in service were identical in all respects to the one tested, so the difference couldn't be explained. But this wasn't quite the case. The prototype sent by Westland to the RAF had a one-off Rotol propeller design, not the de Havilland's Hamilton propellers that the production Whirlwinds received. The metal blades of the de Havilland props were very thick, unsuitable for a high-performance fighter. They had a 9.6% thickness-to-chord ratio. This thick profile blade, combined with a constant speed mechanism that caused inappropriate fining of the propeller blades, was a recipe for disaster. As the Whirlwind climbed at a constant RPM, relative Mach over the blades increased. Moving steadily inwards, more of the blade went critical, as the phenomenon of compressibility created shockwaves. Drag rose exponentially, and the blade turned farther to compensate. The intermittently windmilling prop produces fluctuating boost pressures on top of reduced revolutions per minute. This might look very much like an engine problem, perhaps leading to a maligning of Rolls-Royce Peregrine engines. Well, maybe more so than actually deserved. With the reports of the Whirlwind's altitude performance issues, Sir Hugh Dowding, the head of Fighter Command, made his decision to keep the Whirlwind away from any fighting in the south, sealing its reputation as the fighter that missed the Battle of Britain. Dowling justified his decision. The limiting factor in the present fighting against Me-109s in the south of England is the performance, maneuverability, and climb at high altitudes, and a difference in service ceiling of 2,000 feet is a very important advantage, Dowding said. It therefore seems to me quite wrong to introduce at the present time a fighter whose effective ceiling is 25,000 feet. Number 263 Squadron, one of the only two squadrons to be equipped with the Whirlwind, started receiving units in July 1940. Spending time at RAF Drem and RAF Grangemouth in Scotland. Deprioritized by Rolls-Royce, production of the Peregrine was slow, and it was November 1940 before the squadron was fully equipped. But it would be a full 9 months, in early 1941, before they moved south to be nearer its intended targets in northern France and the English Channel. Stationed at RAF Exeter, it commenced patrols against enemy E-boats stationed in the English Channel and western approaches. Here, on 12th of January 1941, a section patrolling near the Isles of Scilly, a small archipelago off the southwestern tip of Cornwall, the squadron made its first kill, a Junkers Ju-88. But it was in the ground attack role that the Whirlwind's 420mm Hispano cannons were highly effective, and it's with Thomas Pugh, the squadron's 21-year-old commander, we can credit the Whirly bomber variant. At least 67 original fighters were converted to carry the bomb racks. Initially, 2 250-pound bombs could be carried, and later this was increased to a 2 500-pound bomb payload. The squadrons performed air-ground rhubarb attacks on airfields, railways and roads in northern France, as well as roadstead air-sea attacks on light enemy shipping. And despite its low range, it acted occasionally as a fighter escort for bomber day raids. And in a somewhat vindication of its fighter role on the 6th of August 1941, 4 Whirlwinds of the 263 Squadron, whilst on an anti-shipping strike, were intercepted by a formation of Messerschmitt Bf-109s. 3 were destroyed for no British losses. Not bad at all. The other RAF squadron flying the Whirlwind, number 137, had somewhat of a more checkered history with the craft. With enough Whirlwinds produced, it was activated on the 20th of October 1941 at RAF Charmy Down, Somerset, England. Equipped with bomb racks, it begun mandolin attacks on targeted enemy railway transport and ground targets just days later. Unfortunately, almost immediately, it suffered several fatal air accidents that saw its further missions delayed until the 11th of November. Low-level cross-channel rhubarb sweeps where the Whirlwind excelled. Indeed, one pilot from No. 137 Squadron destroyed 4 locomotives in a single mission. In their first 6 months of fighter-bomber operations, No. 137 Squadron hit 37 goods trains, 16 at night and the rest during daylight. But bad luck dogged the 137 Squadron, as on the 12th of February 1942, when they were sent to escort 5 British destroyers, unaware of the escaping German warships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau making the Channel dash to safer ports. They were jumped by 20 Bf-109 fighters protecting the ships, and unwittingly 4 more Whirlwinds were sent to relieve the first 4. By the end of the encounter, 4 of the 8 Whirlwinds failed to return. In June 1943, the Whirlwinds of the 137 reached their end of use, replaced with Hurricane Mark IV fighter bombers. 263 Squadron, the first and last to operate the Whirlwind, flew its final mission with the type on November 29, 1943. In December, the squadron transitioned to the Hawker Typhoon. By January 1, 1944, the Whirlwind was officially declared obsolete. By all reports, the Whirlwind was a remarkable aircraft to fly at low level, and with an impressive armament. It remained effective and relevant deep into the war despite its small numbers. The Westland Whirlwind, for me, remains one of the great what-ifs of military aviation history, to consider what may have happened had the Whirlwind been designed for the Merlin engine, or if the negative effects of its mismatched propeller was discovered and remedied. Or if Rolls-Royce, the RAF and famously difficult designer Teddy Petter had collaborated rather than finger-point. But when I think of twin-engine fighter aircraft, I remember Hugh Dowding, Air Officer commanding RAF Fighter Command during the Battle of Britain, who said it was extravagant to produce a fighter that took 2 engines to do what another might with 1. No wonder his nickname was Stuffy. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and hit the like button. If you would like to see more like this, please press the subscribe and notification buttons. Oh, and don't forget to check out the merch. Hurrah for now.